How you doing, everybody? It's Wednesday the 11th of August 2010. It's in the middle of the afternoon. The weather looks to be it's nice outside, but I think it might have a bit of rain, so hopefully it will. Certainly here in Ireland the soil's very dry and maybe do with a bit of rain. I want to talk about a subject today, and it might offend a lot of people, and it has to do with one particular man. And all I want to say to you is the sort of background to this is when I started doing this series of videos, it's quite, to a large extent, it's quite boring, because really all I ever talk about is politics, economics, the media, and the church. That's all I talk about. I don't talk about anything else. I'm not interested in sport. Don't talk about sport. Don't talk about astrophysics or anything else. I just talk about those four subjects essentially, and really it's only three subjects. It's the government, the media, and the church. And the reason being that they are the three major sources, the three major inputs that make any human being what they are. You have to think about it, but I mean, it's fairly obvious. You're taken as a child, a blank canvas, and the inputs from your family, but they've already had the same input from the government, the church, and the media in their lifetime, and you're eventually moulded, and you become essentially an agent for producing wealth for the state. That's what essentially you are. Okay? You're given a tiny amount of freedom, liberal sort of freedom, libertarian freedom, but tiny amount. But if you step out of line at all, they'll crush you big time. But anyway, that's a different matter. Out of those three, today I want to talk about the church. And the reason I want to talk about it is people saying, well, church doesn't have any more role in society. The main reason I want to talk about it is because up until quite recently, the church did have the preordinate role in society alongside the state. The church actually in Ireland, certainly in Ireland, it was the state. It was the main body, the main propagandizing body, agent of the state. And again, the reason I'm on about this is because loads of people have queried me about how have we ended up in the situation that we've ended up? How have we ended up? This all happened just in the last, even ordinary people realize this in the last 10 or 15 years. Before that, our state was just, going along and whatever. And it had arrived by the middle of the 90s, it had arrived at a reasonably good situation in world terms. It had little or no debt. The borrowings of the average citizen were small. And it had a good, nominal increase on its GDP and its GNP every year. All right? And now we're in a tsunami, an economic tsunami, which is only starting, by the way. This is only start. This winter we'll see the tsunami begin. Anyway, the reason I raise all this is because it's my belief that the people who run us now, the people who are in political power, the people who are in power in the media, and the people who are in power in the church, all have been brought to this position in the main, I know this is hard to believe, but in the main, by the mindset of one particular individual. And this particular individual is a churchman called McQUAID, John Charles McQUAID, an archbishop. And he now, as I say, you may want to know where is all this going? I'm going to try and explain this quickly as I can. This particular man had as much power for 40 years, from around the middle of the 1930s up until he died in 1973. This man had as much power as our Taoiseach, our leader, the leader of our democratically elected government. Because before they enacted any law, McQuaid had to sign off on the law. If it had any impact in relation to church matters or relation, anything to do with church and state, he had to sign off on it. Completely unelected. Nobody elected this man. And for 40 years, if you think about them, through all the various leaders we had, this man acted essentially as a dictator. Our Pope, our Caesar, living up in a palace, a gigantic palace up on the way out to Dublin Airport. All right? So I said about these people, these Roman Catholic prelates and bishops. Imagine if the Nazarene came back today. God almighty, he'd throw up. He'd get sick. Anyway, this man, John Charles McQuaid, and by the way, I think I have the right to say this about these people, because these people educated me from I was 4 until I was 18. And I rejected it at a very early stage. When I was about 14 or 15 and I began to get cognizant and read widely, I rejected their whole philosophy. And I believe that it gives me the right, certainly within my own country, to be critical of these people. But I just want to conduct this little debate, and you see where I'm going. We now have to introduce, so what you have is you had our state democratically elected by the will of the people, and alongside it, as an adjunct, a direct adjunct, was the Roman Catholic hierarchy, and he led that hierarchy. He was the numero uno in that hierarchy for 40 years, and nothing was put into, nothing, no law, no transcription, nothing was put in place in Ireland without him. As I say, he was our Caesar, he was our Pope. All right. Now we have to jump to 11 years ago. And 11 years ago, the religious correspondent of the Irish Independent, he's a man called John Cooney. And he wrote an official biography of John Charles McQuaid. It's called, I couldn't get a copy, it's out of print, the book. I will get a copy of it though. It's called John Charles McQuaid, Ruler of Catholic Ireland. I've put an article up from the Phoenix, because I got some of this information from the Phoenix. I had some of this information before, but this article just clarified it. And I've put it up, and you can have a wee read of it. I'll put it up now. You can have a read of it now. We had a man, I say, who was the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland, and he was a pederast, a closet homosexual. But he wasn't a normal homosexual. Okay? This man engaged in homosexual activities. Because I'm not against homosexuals, I know loads of them. But this man engaged in, let's put it this way, he engaged in his sexual predilection in an extraordinary way for a Roman Catholic prelate. First of all, he was a liar when he did what he did. Okay? Then he was a hypocrite for doing what he did. But the third thing, which is the most important thing, when you read that article, you'll find out, he was, above all, a blackmailer and a coercionist. He coerced people and blackmailed people to have sex with him. How do I know that? Because the people that he made, tried to make contact with, or tried to have sex with, were people within minor positions within his organisation. They were young priests and young seminarians and young college people. Now, you can draw your own conclusions from this. So what you had at the very top of Irish society, the man who was laying down all of the ethical and moral parameters of the day, had a dirty, dark, filthy, disgusting secret. Not the sex. I'm not talking about the sex. I'm talking about blackmailing people. I'm talking about coercing people. I'm talking about his hypocrisy, and I'm talking about his lying. And when you have a society where that's going on at the very top, that permeates all down throughout that society, and it touches everybody in that society.
And it certainly touches everybody in the state and everybody in the church. So we can understand why today the Catholic Church in Ireland is the way that it is. That it's sinking in paedophiles. They're everywhere. And you've all these agents of them making excuses for them, and it's just appalling. My father said to me one day, son, he said, I want you to listen to me. He was an old man at the time. I didn't realise he was about to die. And he told me, he said, son, there are certain things in life that are indefensible. You cannot defend them. You can't defend them in any court. You can't defend them anywhere. They're indefensible. Now, he was talking, what my father was talking about was the murder of the Jews in the concentration camps throughout Poland and northern Germany and that, right? And I had read about it at the time. I was about 15 or 16 at the time, and I had read about it, and I had to admit that's what the story was. And it's like this with this John Charles McQuaid situation. The bottom line about it is, none of this is defensible. You cannot defend this. And the bottom line and the proof of the pudding that this actually is the case is the fact that John Cooney, who's a Scotsman, from what I understand and from what people have told me, he is quite a middle of the road Catholic, quite a conservative type Catholic. He has got the stick and really whizzed up the wasp's nest. And they come out and they blackballed this man. He's never allowed on the TV or the radio anymore, and they won't publish his articles. What a world. I tell you, what a world. And then people wonder why we're in the situation that we're in today in Ireland. You have to think about this. But you know what? The more you think about it, the less you really want to think about it. Because it's a horrible, horrible vista.